My name is Hassan Qasim. I'm the CEO of Alternative Energy Project. Alternative Energy Project is a renewable energy developer basically in the MENA market. We are 100% subsidiary of KIPCO, Kuwait Project Company Holding, which is one of the big conglomerates in the region, focused on financing, real estate, media, insurance, and such, where we are acting as the renewable energy arm for the group. A quick overview of what I'm going to present today. It will be, I'll go over a little bit introduction about the, I will not be going over many of the topics that being discussed today. I mean, the whole thing being, I have a lot of experts been discussing the topic of PPP and the contractual area aspect, legal aspect, and other thing. From my perspective, I'll be very precise on just a simple concept, suitability for renewable projects, and how that will be going on. So a little bit introduction about the concept. Infrastructure shortages, especially in developing country, produced a quite big major obstacle for improving living standard and enterprise development. And there, especially with the Paris Agreement being a big motivator to move ahead and decarbonize, and with the targets being set to fully decarbonize by the different region and set up a huge goal for that. That provided, especially in the Middle East and the MENA region, infrastructure deemed had long been raising due to population growth, rapid urbanization, economical expansion. Nevertheless, this was amplified over the time, especially with the transition pressured by government, because we have a certain increase in living standard and we want to improve the business environment. Nevertheless, many countries, there's a high level of investments required. The high level of investment required for infrastructure cannot be financed in any way by public purse. The private investment is therefore an option that government, of course, cannot afford to ignore. And this has been clearly announced and highlighted in the region here. So private investment goes beyond additional capital to mobilize private sector. There's an expertise and managerial skills in the public interest that is also needed. So just as a general concept on how to go and what's the statement behind going into the PPP approach. Now, if you would look at just renewable energy as a project concept and deployment requirement, you can see that the demand for renewable has never gone down over the years. So we're talking about even in the 90s, the escalation has been so big that we even hardly ever seen any slowdown in the demand and the growth. There were multiple factors. Just to simplify it, cost reduction and environmental movement. Those two being very important factors. I mean, now we're talking about a deployment availability of 2020 of more than 270 gigawatt of renewable project being deployed per year. I'm talking as a deployment per annum. If you look at the conventional non-capacity, basically non-renewables in general, I will not label them as a conventional. It's been decreasing as a ratio of deployment. So going further and looking into the region for more zoning in into our region here, just by around this year, we're talking about more than 20 gigawatt that being constructed, awarded, and a new target being set for the region for about 100 gigawatt by just 2030. Saudi Arabia has the biggest share out of that, while others are being spread between the other countries in the region. Going further and looking at the direct requirement for finance and where the money been flowing in over the years, you can see that renewable energy. Of course, we have to put hydro as a little bit away from that because it will change the equation a little bit. Is been taking actually the lead share for the ratio of investments that being directed to the infrastructure into that segment over the years. We're talking more than $300 billion by 2020 was all just invested by private sector in the climate finance over the last few years. So finance is being hugely directed toward this segment. Now, why renewables? Just to make a very simple top-level comparison. I mean, the presentation throughout the day been discussing about many different elements of the PPP, but why PPP can be adopted nicely for renewable energy. I mean, let's talk about some of the big highlights. Duration. For me to go to investments and renewable or any project, investment is totally different approach where I do need a decent duration, at least equivalent to the life cycle of the project, of the plant itself. And you can see that renewable has a decent life cycle in comparison to conventional, which actually has a very long life cycle, but the contract duration tend to be always in that range. So you have 20, 30 years for renewables, 25, 30, and for conventional, even it goes beyond that a little bit. And then you have expected revenue. Now, we say expected revenue, that means that the revenue expectation, which controls many other elements for the different project, when we look at it from the investment point of view. Renewable energy has a very stable kind of revenue expectation. The reason is either it's wind or solar, or it comes on a very fixed parameters as a type of input. Mostly it's forecasted against P50, P90 data coming in, and then forecasted over the years. Most of the thing that been affecting it is inflation, cost or other related depreciation, which all are forecasted and quite known. So, and if you talk about revenue stability, it's quite stable. Conventional, on the other hand, it has two big variability into them. Talking about it mainly is demand, because it's a function of demand. And because it's a function of demand, it's also a function of a fuel. And fuel is volatile. One of the very volatile variable that you have, while demand is also can be controlled as how much is an offtake being taken. But nevertheless, it makes the expected revenue forecast quite volatile in that. Then based on this, if you look at the return volatility expectation, because that one is stable, you have the volatility on the return, it's lower. Conventional is moderate. Now, another important factor that makes it quite decent for investments is the concept of what we call them deemed energy. Renewable energy tend to have one-to-one concept of deemed energy, meaning that because the energy input is stable, whatever I generate, I have the off-taker have to take it. So if there's a failure from the off-taker point of view, a substation on the off-taker went down and such, it's still a deemed energy. I can still file it. So this makes it more stable from the perspective of income and basically as an off-take. And this is, by the way, a very important parameters that it's being required by the lenders, that they will not, most of the lender will even avoid negotiating a project without a deemed energy concept. A convention, on the other hand, they have the take-or-pay concept, which is a little bit different, setting up a minimum threshold, which is can take up or low. It's a different concept, which can work in a certain area, but also can introduce a little bit of volatility. But again, it goes back to how it's being set up from that perspective. So, and then finally, because of how funding and how renewables are being very important as a concept, as going on with our basically decarbonation concept to go over in, the setup for finance been quite high for renewable. Well, I will not say in the region here, it's still an early stage. Some regions, some areas has more concentration of finance being directed, where the others, unfortunately in Kuwait, not much has been directed into that direction. But nevertheless, it's much more easier to fund as an overall, where conventional dedicated funds are still, I would say, not limited, even less than the availability for renewables. The next step, I will go over it in a little bit faster approach. I'm presenting here different projects being executed and running. I'm going to only show three. That just to show the viability of different countries into trying to go into investment projects in renewables, and as a certain concept implement into the ownership structure. So for example, this is a flagship in Oman. It's called the Ibri project. It's located in Al-Zahira County and in Ibri, and the off-taker is OPWP, the Oman Power and Water Procurement Company. Project is about 600 DC, 500 megawatt AC. The technology is solar PV with single access tracking. It is a PPA offtake for 15 years. And then the contract will shift to spot market for the next 15 years as an offtake. So the surfactant contract agreement is actually for 30 years, while the offtake direct PPA is 15 years. Now, as a typical Oman approach, the project has no, we call it payment guarantee or sovereign guarantee, not a payment guarantee, it's a sovereign guarantee associated with it. Nevertheless, the ownership structure in Oman project associated with OPWP will always require that there's a split between ownership. So 60% goes always to the private owners, where 40% has to be publicly floated within 14 months after COD. This is more of a general structure, how this project is being set. You can see a PPA directly with the off-taker, where you have the PFA set up on the project founders and EHC. You have the ECA, ESA, and the OSTRUCT agreement to manage all the interlink of the project. Another example of such a project is Suwayhan, Abu Dhabi. Suwayhan is a flagship project in Abu Dhabi, and its off-taker is Adwiya. Well, their name now is actually Department of Energy, has been changed. It's a 1.2 gigawatt project. It's a fixed tilt technology, solar PV, and the offtake is at DPOO for 25 years. There is a payment agreement associated with this project, and the ownership is a little bit actually different than how it's been said. So it's a 40 private with 60% government offtake. So there's the split of the structure. This is an unfortunate old project, one of the good ones being set in Jordan, Shams Ma'an in Ma'an area, and the offtake is NEPCO, the national power company. And then it's about 55 megawatts, one of the first being set up in the country here. And the technology is actually solar PV thin film with a fixed tilt. The PPA offtake, it's a depot. This one is more of a depot rather than a DPOO for 20 years. And Jordan, in all, they always provide sovereign guarantee for their projects, at least for the previous one, where now is there's a discussion that it may not happen. The ownership structure is 100% private ownership. So, I mean, just to show a different example on how the same project could be 100% private or others. Jordan situation offtake on the PPP model is a bit different, and allocation of budget is also a little bit different. So just to summarize the whole presentation, you can see that there are some challenges in setting up a direct policymaker where basically, especially in the policy setup where infrastructure investment involved. I mean, this is just a general offtake. What we need to have an attractive PPP in the renewables usually is we need a complex and long duration contract. We need a financial stability while, and of course, meeting user needs and social objectives, like COP26, Paris Agreement and stuff. And then we need to have a large project size, which in many cases require international investment. So having all of this, you can see that renewables does fit nicely. I mean, many they say it's a conventional power infrastructure project, which is in a sense it's true. But if you look at it from the perspective of investments, actually many like it more than even regular conventional for a long-term investment in comparison to the other. So with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.